Welcome, dear travellers of the night, to a tale where the stars themselves might just wink at you. I'm Mooncat, your guide through this cosmic tapestry of mischief and adventure. Before we dive into tonight's story, one that sparkles with wit, charm, and a touch of Drow magic, why not give that like button a little nudge? And if you're feeling particularly daring, hit subscribe too. So settle in, let your mind wander, and prepare to be whisked away to the Starstone Caverns, where our charming and cunning Drow, Zaelith, has a story or two to share, just for you. In the heart of the Starstone Caverns, where even the darkest shadows dared not linger for fear of missing the nightly spectacle, Zaelith stood in awe. The cavern walls shimmered with the light of 1,000 constellations, each stone a tiny universe unto itself. The effect was rather like standing inside the most ostentatious ballroom in existence. If the ballroom had a thing for astronomy and could afford the services of a celestial decorator. Zaelith had seen many things in her travel cities built on the backs of enormous turtles, libraries where the books whispered secrets to those who could listen, and even the occasional tavern that served a decent pint. But nothing quite compared to the Starstone Caverns. The moment she stepped inside, she was struck by a sense of awe so profound it almost made her forget to be cynical. Almost. The cavern was vast, so vast that even the echoes had trouble finding their way back. The ceiling arched high above her, lost in the darkness, with only the occasional glimmer of distant stars to suggest that it even existed at all. The walls, however, were another matter entirely. They shimmered and sparkled, not with the dull gleam of ordinary gemstones, but with the vibrant, living light of stars. It was as if someone had taken the night sky, wrung it out like a wet towel, and draped the result over the stone. The constellations, familiar and strange, danced across the surfaces, shifting subtly as if they were being stirred by a gentle cosmic breeze. Colours, too, played their part in this grand spectacle. Deep blues and purples swirled together, like the ink of a celestial artist, punctuated by flashes of silver and gold that seemed to pulse in time with some unseen rhythm. Here and there, a fiery red star would flare up, its light casting long, dancing shadows that flickered and swayed like they were attending some cosmic ball. The floor was polished smooth, reflecting the starry walls above, creating the illusion that Zaelith was walking through the very fabric of the universe itself. It was, Zaelith decided, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, which, naturally, made her suspicious. Places like this always have a catch, she muttered to herself, her keen eyes scanning the cavern for any sign of traps, trickery, or worse, sentimentality. But the longer she stood there, the more the cavern's beauty began to seep into her bones, wrapping her in a sense of calm she hadn't felt in ages. It was the kind of calm that made a person want to sit down, have a nice cup of tea, and maybe write a poem about the nature of existence. Zaelith, being both Drow and a rogue, was decidedly not a poet, but she could appreciate the sentiment. The cavern was grand, yes, but not in the overbearing way that some grand things are. It didn't shout its magnificence from the rooftops if caverns had rooftops, nor did it demand your attention like a gaudy noble in a too-tight doublet. No, the Starstone Caverns whispered their grandeur, inviting you to take your time to explore, to marvel at the wonder of it all. It was the kind of place that made even a hardened adventurer like Zaelith feel, well, small, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of smallness that reminded you that there were bigger things out there, things that were beautiful and mysterious and maybe just a little bit terrifying. Zaelith allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, feeling the weight of the cavern's ancient, star-filled gaze upon her. The shimmering light played across her face, highlighting the delicate lines of her features and casting shadows that seemed to dance in time with her heartbeat. There was something deeply humbling about standing in a place that had witnessed the birth and death of stars, a place that held within its stone walls the stories of 1,000 lifetimes. And then, just as quickly as the feeling had come, it passed. Zaelith was, after all, a rogue, and rogues had a reputation to maintain. She straightened her shoulders, tossed her hair back with a practiced flick, and smirked at the nearest constellation. As she moved through the cavern, the colors shifted around her, as if the stars themselves were watching her progress with interest. The cool blues deepened into midnight, the purples richened into velvet, and the golds brightened into something almost blinding in its brilliance. It was as though the entire universe had conspired to create this one perfect moment just for her. Zaelith couldn't help but feel a certain kinship with the cavern. Like her, it was beautiful, mysterious, and not entirely what it seemed. It was a place of secrets and stories, and Zaelith was more than ready to unlock them all. The sense of peace that had washed over her upon entering had settled into a steady calm, a feeling that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Zaelith, a drow with a penchant for the dramatic, felt right at home. A cave with stars on the inside, she murmured, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. Finally, a place that understands my flair for the dramatic. She sauntered deeper into the cavern, her footfalls echoing softly. The air was cool and carried a faint scent of something ancient and mysterious, like the breath of a library that had been undisturbed for millennia. The kind of place, Zaelith thought, that held secrets in every corner and whispered them only to those who knew how to listen. Zaelith did not need to listen. She simply touched one of the glittering stones, and the secrets came to her. The stone was smooth and cold under her fingertips, yet it pulsed with a warmth that was strangely comforting. As she touched it, a fragment of a story unfurled in her mind, a tale of ancient mariners who navigated by the stars, trusting in the constellations to guide them across treacherous seas. Zaelith closed her eyes and let the story wash over her like the gentle waves of an imagined ocean. As Zaelith wandered through the glittering Starstone Caverns, her thoughts meandered back to a different kind of adventure, one that had taken her far from the comforting shadows of the Underdark and out into the vast, unpredictable expanse of the Great Sea. The memory made her shiver, though whether from the cool cavern air or the recollection of her seasickness, she couldn't quite tell. Zaelith loved the idea of the ocean. It was romantic in a way, vast, untamed, and full of secrets. The gentle lull of the waves, the way the horizon seemed to stretch into infinity, the thought of hidden treasures lying at the bottom of its depths, it was all so poetic. But the reality of it, well, the reality was that the moment Zaelith set foot on a ship, she was less mysterious and cunning rogue, and more green around the gills and reaching for the nearest bucket. Seasickness, she had discovered, was one of the few things that could reduce her to a groaning, miserable mess, immune to all her usual charm. But she'd had no choice. The map she'd won off that shifty deep gnome in the House of Galby was too tempting to pass up. The House of Galby, for the uninitiated, was a place where luck and wit collided with equal force, and where the stakes were high enough to make even the most seasoned gambler sweat. Zaelith had taken a particular delight in fleecing the gnome, who had thought he could outplay her with a rigged deck. A few sleight of hand tricks later, and the map had been hers, a map that led to a treasure so legendary that even the most stoic Drow would have salivated at the thought of it. A giant mauve pearl. Now, it was a well-known fact that Drow had a particular fondness for pearls, and Zaelith was no exception. There was something about the smooth, iridescent surface of a pearl that appealed to her sensibilities, elegant, beautiful, and with just a hint of danger. But this pearl was supposed to be the size of a dragon's egg and worth a king's ransom. It was quite literally the pearl of a lifetime. And so Zaelith had found herself aboard a ship captained by one of the most notorious pirates in all of Faerun. Captain Darius Stormwind was a man with a reputation as fierce as the storms he was named after, though in person he was far more charming than one might expect from a man who had once sacked the port of Luskan single-handedly, or so the stories went. He was tall, with sun-kissed skin, a quick smile, and a glint in his eye that spoke of 1,000 untold tales. Zaelith had liked him immediately, even if her stomach had not. The two of them had spent hours on the deck, the captain steering the ship with the ease of a man born to the sea, while Zaelith tried desperately not to think about the churning waves beneath them. To distract herself, she'd engaged the captain in conversation, no small feat, when one's primary focus is not throwing up over the side. They'd talked about many things, from the best taverns in Baldur's Gate to the various ways one could outwit a siren. Stuck-up creatures, Siren Zaelith had said, leaning against the railing as the sun dipped below the horizon, always acting like they're too good for the rest of us. And don't get me started on their singing. If I wanted to listen to wailing all night, I'd visit my relatives. The captain had laughed at that, a deep, hearty laugh that made even the sea seem to pause for a moment. Aye, that they are. Beautiful, but with an attitude that make a dragon blush. You know, I once had to outsing a siren just to get my crew back. Thought she could mesmerize them with her voice. Turns out, she hadn't counted on a pirate with a taste for shanties and a voice that could carry across the entire Sword Coast. Zaelith had been thoroughly entertained by the story, and before she knew it, the conversation had drifted to other topics, including the captain's unusual childhood pet, a baby dragon turtle. You had a what? Zaelith had asked, incredulous, as she imagined a young Darius wrestling with a creature that most people would run screaming from. A baby dragon turtle, the captain had confirmed, his eyes far away as he recalled the memory. Found it by the shore, all alone and injured. Its mother must have abandoned it. Poor thing was barely the size of a large dog, all scales and flippers. I couldn't just leave it there, so I took it home, nursed it back to health with fish and seawater, named it Sheldon. Zaelith had raised an eyebrow at that, unable to suppress a smile. Sheldon. Well, I was young, the captain had said with a sheepish grin. But he grew on me. Strong little fellow with a temper to match. My mother nearly had a fit when she found out. Said dragon turtles were ferocious creatures and that keeping one was like inviting a storm into our home. I didn't care, though I thought Sheldon was the best thing in the world, but in the end I had to let him go, set him back into the ocean where he belonged. Still think about him from time to time, though, always wondered what happened to him. Part of me hopes I'll run into him one day, all grown up, and causing a bit of mischief in the sea. Zaelith had been fascinated, completely engrossed in the captain's story. She could picture it, a young boy and a dragon turtle, an unlikely pair if ever there was one. It was the kind of tale that made the world seem a little bit bigger, a little bit stranger, and a lot more wonderful. For a while, she'd even forgotten about her seasickness, lost in the captain's tales of adventure, loss, and the bittersweet joy of letting go. They'd talked for hours, the conversation flowing as smoothly as the waves beneath them. And when they finally reached their destination, a small, uninhabited island, where the treasure was supposed to be buried, Zaelith had felt almost disappointed that the journey was over. But the pearl had been there, just as the map had promised. A giant mauve pearl, glimmering in the moonlight, like a treasure from a dream. It had been worth the nausea, the long days at sea, even the dubious honor of being the only Drow in history to have turned a shade of green that wasn't related to poison. What she'd done with the pearl afterward was another story, one she wasn't quite ready to share, not yet. As Zaelith stood in the shimmering cavern, she smiled to herself. The ocean was a place of contradictions, beautiful and terrifying, gentle and furious, soothing and utterly nauseating. She hated it, and she loved it. But most of all, she respected it. The same way she respected the stars that now sparkled around her, the same way she respected the stories hidden within them. Zaelith reached out to touch another starstone, feeling the familiar tingle of a new story waiting to be uncovered. The cavern was a place of endless possibilities, just like the ocean, and Zaelith, with her endless curiosity and flair for the dramatic, was more than ready to dive in. As Zaelith let her fingers glide over the smooth, cool surface of the starstone, she couldn't help but marvel at the intricate constellations etched into the cavern walls. It was all very grand and poetic, of course, navigating by the stars, relying on celestial guidance to find one's way. But as much as Zaelith appreciated the romanticism of it all, she had always preferred maps over stars. Maps, you see, were practical. They were tangible, something you could hold in your hands, fold into neat squares and tuck into your coat pocket. Stars, on the other hand, were distant and aloof, twinkling up in the sky with all the smugness of something that knew it was out of reach. They demanded you trust them implicitly, to look up and hope they would guide you true. And while Zaelith had her share of trust issues, occupational hazard of being a cunning rogue, really her preference for maps wasn't just about practicality. No, it was more than that. Maps had a certain tactility to them that Zaelith found comforting. The feel of the parchment under her fingertips, the faint scent of ink and aged paper, the way the lines and symbols came together to form a world that was both mysterious and conquerable at the same time, it was all so wonderfully reassuring. A map was a promise, a contract between the reader and the world, saying, here's where you've been, and here's where you're going. The rest is up to you. Maps also had a delightful sense of finality to them. They could be finished, complete, with all the unknowns neatly charted and labelled. Stars, on the other hand, never stayed still. They moved, shifted, and sometimes even disappeared altogether, as if they had better things to do than to guide lost travellers. A map wouldn't do that to you. A map was reliable, dependable, and didn't require you to squint into the night sky, trying to remember if that was the North Star or just a particularly bright firefly. And perhaps deep down, Zaelith preferred maps because they made her feel in control. The stars might dictate the fates of others, but with a map in hand, Zaelith felt like she was the one making the decisions. She could plot her own course, choose her own destination. And if she didn't like where she was headed, she could simply refold the map and start again. There was something empowering about that, something that spoke to her rogue's heart. So while the starstones in the cavern were undoubtedly beautiful, with their shimmering constellations and hidden stories, Zaelith couldn't help but smile as she thought of the worn, creased map tucked away in her bag. It had guided her through many adventures, from the treacherous streets of Skullport to the windswept plains of Anoroksh, and it would continue to guide her long after the stars had faded from the night sky. Stars are overrated as navigational tools, she mused aloud, her voice echoing in the quiet cavern. Give me a good map and a decent compass any day, but I suppose when you're lost at sea with nothing but a sky full of twinkling lights, you make do. She traced the outline of a star with her fingertip, feeling the gentle hum of magic beneath the surface. Yes, the stars had their charm, but give her a good old-fashioned map any day. She moved to the next stone, a deep blue gem that sparkled with an inner light. This one told a different tale, a meeting with a celestial being of immense power and an ego to match. Zaelith smiled as she recalled her encounter with the so-called Star King, a being who had insisted on being worshipped as a god until Zaelith had pointed out, in her usual charming manner, that gods generally didn't lose at chess to cunning Drow rogues. Zaelith's journey to meet the Star King began, as most of her adventures did, with a mix of curiosity, ambition, and a healthy disregard for the warnings of those who should probably know better. It was said that the Star King could be found at the edge of the world, in a place where the sky kissed the sea, and time itself took a breather. Naturally, this piqued Zaelith's interest. If there was a king of stars, and if he could indeed be found, then surely there was something to be gained from such an encounter, if nothing else, a good story to tell. The place where she found the Star King wasn't so much a location as it was a concept. It was a twilight realm, a liminal space where the horizon was neither here nor there, and the air hummed with a strange, serene energy. The sky above was a tapestry of stars, more brilliant and numerous than any Zaelith had ever seen, stretching out in all directions like the most extravagant jewelry display. It was breathtaking, of course, but Zaelith was more interested in the figure standing in the center of this celestial stage. The Star King was, in a word, magnificent. He was tall, with skin that seemed to be made of stardust itself, shimmering and shifting with every movement. His eyes were the color of deep space, dark and endless, with just a hint of twinkling light. His hair, long and flowing, was like a comet's tail, a streak of silver and gold that seemed to leave a trail of light behind him. He wore robes of midnight blue dotted with tiny points of light, as if the very stars had woven themselves into his garments. But it wasn't just his appearance that was striking, it was his presence. There was a quiet power about him, a sense of vastness and eternity that made even someone as self-assured as Zaelith feel momentarily small. The Star King, as she learned through their conversation, was not just the ruler of the stars, but their creator, their guardian, and their guide. He was a god in the way that gods often are, aloof, enigmatic, and just a bit too fond of riddles. His domain was the night sky, the constellations, the celestial bodies that danced in the heavens. He was the god of navigation, of destiny, of the stories written in the stars, and of the eternal balance between light and darkness. He was also, as it turned out, a rather enthusiastic chess player. Chess, Zaelith had asked, raising an eyebrow as the Star King conjured a board from the air between them. The pieces were naturally made of starlight, each one glowing softly in the dim light of the realm. Indeed, the Star King replied, his voice deep and resonant, like the sound of distant thunder. A game of strategy, of foresight, of understanding the patterns in the chaos, much like the movement of the stars. Zaelith had never been one to back down from a challenge, and besides, the idea of playing chess with a god was too intriguing to pass up. She took her seat across from the Star King, who watched her with an expression that was somewhere between curiosity and amusement. Now Zaelith was no novice when it came to chess. She had played many a game in the dark corners of taverns, against opponents who underestimated her at their peril. But playing against the Star King was something else entirely. His moves were precise, calculated, each one like a celestial event, unfolding in perfect harmony. It was clear that he was accustomed to winning after all. Who could possibly outmaneuver the god of the stars? Zaelith, however, had a few tricks up her sleeve. For all the Star King's knowledge and power, he was at his core a creature of order. His every move was part of a grand design, a cosmic dance that followed a rhythm older than time itself. But Zaelith was a rogue, and rogues thrived on chaos. The game went on, each of them making their moves in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the starlit pieces sliding across the board. Zaelith could feel the Star King's strategy unfolding, a web of inevitability closing in around her. But instead of panicking, she did what she did best. She improvised. Zaelith's strategy was not one of careful planning but of disruption. She made moves that seemed reckless, even foolish, but each one threw the Star King off balance. He was accustomed to opponents who played by the rules of the game, who followed the same patterns, the same paths. But Zaelith did not. She took risks, made sacrifices that made little sense on the surface, but each one chipped away at the Star King's advantage. It was in the final moments of the game, with both sides down to their last few pieces, that Zaelith made her move. She sacrificed her queen, a bold and seemingly suicidal play, but it was all part of her plan. The Star King, confident in his victory, took the bait. In the next move, Zaelith's knight slid across the board, placing the Star King's king in checkmate. There was a moment of silence, the Star King staring down at the board in surprise. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, a smile that was both impressed and bemused. "Well played," he said, inclining his head in a gesture of respect. "It seems that even the stars can be outshone by a clever mind." Zaelith couldn't help but grin, leaning back in her chair with a sense of satisfaction. "It was a good game," she replied, and for once there was no need for her usual quips or witticisms. The victory spoke for itself. The Star King, true to his word, granted Zaelith a boon. He offered her a gift, a starstone, one that would always guide her when she was lost, whether on land or sea. It was a rare and precious thing, a fragment of the heavens that would remain with her always, a reminder of the game she had played and won against the god of the stars. As she left the Twilight Realm and returned to the world she knew, Zaelith couldn't help but chuckle to herself. The stars might be distant and untouchable, but for once she had shown that even they could be brought down to earth. And as she tucked the starstone into her pocket, she knew that wherever her adventures took her next, she would never be truly lost, not as long as she had her maps, her wits, and of course a little bit of starlight to guide her way. Celestial beings, she chuckled, shaking her head, always so full of themselves, and yet all it takes is a bit of cleverness and that putty in your hands, or, in this case, chess pieces. She continued her exploration, each stone unlocking another memory, another story. There was the time she had deciphered a cryptic message from a particularly cryptic moon goddess, though deciphered might be too strong a word. The goddess had a penchant for riddles that made even the most seasoned puzzle masters weep in frustration. Zaelith had spent hours pondering the meaning of an ancient inscription only to realize that it translated, more or less, to "do not meddle in the affairs of moon goddesses," for they are subtle and quick to anger. Note to self, Zaelith said with a wry smile next time. Ask for celestial messages in plain common. A simple beware of the werewolves would have sufficed. The cavern seemed to hum in response, as if it appreciated her humour. The stories continued to flow, each one more enchanting than the last. There was the tale of a forgotten kingdom that had thrived under the guidance of a starry-eyed queen who had, quite literally, drawn her power from the night sky. And then there was the story of the rogue star that had gone missing from its constellation, causing all manner of celestial mischief until Zaelith had found it hiding, as it turned out, in a jar of fireflies. Zaelith leaned back against the cool stone of the cavern, a wry smile playing on her lips as she addressed her unseen audience. Now, you might be wondering, she began, her tone light and conspiratorial, how exactly a cunning rogue like myself managed to find herself in possession of a jar of fireflies and, more importantly, why a star would bother hiding in the first place. Well, let me tell you. It's a tale of such improbable mischief that you'll be shaking your head in disbelief, much like I did at the time. It all started, as most of her escapades did, with something shiny. Zaelith had been on the trail of a particularly elusive treasure, rumoured to be hidden in the labyrinthine depths of the Whispering Woods. The locals, bless their simple hearts, spoke in hushed tones of a rogue star that had fallen from the sky and taken up residence in the forest. They said it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen, glowing with a light that was both warm and cold, soft and sharp, like moonlight trapped in a diamond. Of course, Zaelith couldn't resist. A rogue star that was practically begging to be stolen, and she was just the Drow for the job. So off she went, into the woods with nothing but her wits, a well-oiled crossbow, and a vague sense that this was going to end in either glory or a rather embarrassing defeat. What she hadn't anticipated, however, was just how tricky stars could be. You see, the star had fallen from the sky for a reason. It wasn't your typical obedient celestial body. No, this star had ideas, it had dreams, specifically dreams of not being part of some grand cosmic design, shining dutifully in the night sky for all eternity. It wanted to see the world, have a bit of fun, maybe even get into a little trouble. So naturally it decided to hide. Hide and seek with a star, Zaelith muttered, recalling the ordeal with a shake of her head. Sounds easy, doesn't it? I mean, how hard could it be to find something that literally glows in the dark? Turns out, pretty darn hard. The star had chosen to hide in a rather unexpected place inside a jar of fireflies. Now, fireflies, as anyone who's tried to catch them knows, are tricky little blighters. They dart about, blink on and off, and generally make a nuisance of themselves. So imagine Zaelith's surprise when, after hours of fruitless searching, she stumbled upon a glowing jar of fireflies nestled in the roots of an ancient tree. At first, she thought it was just a clever prank ajar left by some mischievous forest spirit to lead treasure hunters astray. But then she noticed something odd. Among the twinkling fireflies was a light that didn't flicker. It shone steady and bright, a tiny point of light that seemed almost too perfect, too constant to be a mere insect. Well, isn't that clever, Zaelith had muttered to herself, carefully picking up the jar. The fireflies buzzed around inside, oblivious to the celestial hitchhiker in their midst, hiding in plain sight. I might have to steal that trick But of course, getting the star out of the jar was another matter entirely. It wasn't exactly keen on returning to the sky, and Zaelith wasn't keen on letting it go without something to show for her efforts. So, after a bit of negotiation, which, in rogue terms, involved a lot of fast talking and a bit of light extortion, Zaelith struck a deal. The star agreed to return to the sky, but not before giving Zaelith a gift, a little shard of its light, something she could use to find her way in the darkest of places. In return, Zaelith promised to keep the jar of fireflies, a reminder of the night she played hide and seek with a star, and actually won. So there you have it, Zaelith said, chuckling softly. A jar of fireflies and a rogue star with a flair for mischief. And as for why it was hiding in the first place, well, let's just say even stars need a break from time to time. After all, hanging up there in the sky, night after night, shining for everyone to see, it's a tough gig. And who could blame it for wanting to come down to earth and have a bit of fun? With that, Zaelith held up the jar, the fireflies within casting a warm, golden glow in the dim light of the cavern. It's not every day you outwit a star, she mused, but when you do, make sure to get a souvenir. They make for great conversation pieces. And with that, she set the jar down beside her, the fireflies continuing their lazy dance, oblivious to the fact that they had once shared space with a celestial rogue, who for a brief moment had tried to outshine the night. Through it all, Zaelith's voice remained calm and soothing, resonating in the quiet caverns. It was the kind of voice that could lull a person to sleep while simultaneously keeping them on the edge of their seat, wondering what clever quip or witty observation she would make next. As she reached the far end of the cavern, where the stars on the walls grew faint and the air grew still, Zaelith paused. She had unlocked many tales, each one a fragment of the vast tapestry that made up her life, her adventures, her world. But there was one story left to tell, the story of Zaelith herself. With a chuckle, she placed her hand on the final stone. Though next time I'd prefer my celestial messages in plain common. Thank you very much, she quipped, her eyes twinkling with mischief. The stone glowed brighter, as if acknowledging her request, and for a moment the entire cavern seemed to hold its breath. Zaelith smiled. A slow, satisfied smile that spoke of countless adventures yet to come. She was, after all, a rogue of many talents, cunning, beautiful, cultured, and more than a little charming. The Starstone Caverns had revealed their secrets, but Zaelith knew there were always more stories to uncover, more adventures to be had, more stars to chase. And so, with a final glance at the glittering walls, she turned and made her way out of the caverns, her footsteps echoing softly in the starlit silence. The stories she had unlocked would stay with her, a constellation of memories to guide her on her next journey. But for now, it was time to rest, to dream of stars and secrets, and the endless night sky. As she stepped into the cool night air, Zaelith couldn't help but smile. There was always another adventure waiting, just beyond the next horizon. And she, of all people, knew how to find it. And so, with a jar of fireflies by her side and a mischievous glint in her eye, Zaelith continues her journey, leaving us with a tale that sparkles like the stars she so cleverly outwitted. If you enjoyed this little escapade through the constellations and beyond, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again. After all, you never know when a rogue star or a rogue drow might drop by with another story to tell. Until then, sweet dreams and safe travels, fellow wanderers. I'm Mooncat, signing off.